I see surgery as very similar to music in skill and technique and fluency. In fact, if you look at the data that Intuitive Surgical gets on our hands off of our consoles, our surgeons, they can tell dialects of surgeons. They can tell where we're from by the movement of our hands on the consoles, which I think is completely fascinating. So there are dialects of surgery. Welcome back to the Dr. Crockett Show. I'm your host, Dr. Susan Crockett. I'm a board-certified OBGYN specializing in minimally invasive GYN surgery in San Antonio. But that is not what we talk about on this show. This show is about going where the scalpel doesn't reach. So most of what we talk about is not medical. I have a very special episode for y'all today. I am going to give you the story of me. So I've been asked quite a bit. Patients typically want to know a little bit about the background of their surgeon. Being in a medical office is kind of a strange thing sometimes. So in a surgery practice like I run now, I basically don't get to choose who's behind the door of the office that I walk into. It's just, somebody's there, they've booked an appointment with me, they need my help. And so what I've practiced over the years is just walking into that door and just practicing loving whoever's there and doing my best to help them no matter what's going on. That has actually changed me as a person. That's one of the things that's helped develop the story of who I am. But the other thing patients will always want to know is, well, who are you as a surgeon and why can I trust you and why should I let you operate on me? And on a show such as this, I'm sure a lot of you are asking, well, who the heck is she anyway? And why should I listen to her? So, you may or may not want to listen to me, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of my background, tell you who I am, and why I'm so dedicated to teaching people about personal transformation and about helping our world become a better place, one person at a time, or one episode at a time, as it seems to be now. So, I was born in New Jersey, which I catch a lot of grief for. I was actually born in Livingston, New Jersey. I'm the granddaughter of German and Austrian and Scottish immigrants, and they mostly came through Ellis Island. So from my mother's side, all the men were fishermen. They lived in northern Germany, which was sometimes Denmark and sometimes Germany. So I have a lot of Danish in me. And they were in a fishing village. So they immigrated to the United States. My opa, who's one of my probably the strongest reason that I became a physician, he came to the United States when he was a late teenager and went through what was at the time engineering school and became an engineer and taught himself English and met my grandmother. And all the women on that side of the family were very, very creative. My Oma, we called her Oma, but she was one of the Scottish descendants. And that side of the family, and also my dad's mother's side of the family, where all the women were seamstresses. So one of the jokes about what I do now is I tell people that I came from a line of men who were engineers and a long line of seamstresses on the female side. And when they came together, they made me. And that's why I'm a robotic surgeon. I put them both together. So that's a little bit about my family history and my background. I lived in New Jersey very briefly. We moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania when I was just 2 years old, and I was there until I was 7 years old. My dad worked for an 18-wheeler trucking company called Heil. They also made garbage trucks and all kinds of equipment like that, and he was a manager. And when I was 7 years old, he got moved to Huntsville, Texas. Yeah. So in my 7-year mind, I was conjuring up what Texas looked like. I thought, oh, it's going to be all of these cactuses and deserts and cowboys and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know about moving to Texas. And I ended up right in the middle of East Texas, which is the Piney Woods, which is a beautiful place to grow up, and was there until I graduated from high school. So my mom had a background as an RN. She was a stay-at-home mom with me growing up, but I think between her medical background and then my dad's entrepreneurial background that helped propel me into what I'm doing today. I had a very good family upbringing. I'm the oldest of three. In case you couldn't tell, yes, I'm an oldest sibling. I have a younger sister and a younger brother, and I just adore them both. The three of us grew up in Huntsville. I graduated from high school early. I was 17 when I graduated. During high school, I was super overachiever. I graduated, I think, third in my class only because I didn't want to be the one that stood up there and did the speeches at graduation. So I kind of like slid in under the radar. And I was really lucky to be in a place where I was exposed to the arts and to lots of academic challenges, which was, I think, unusual for a small Eastern Texas town. So when I was growing up, I like to say that I was a musician before I was a physician. So piano music was my first love. I remember as a 3-year-old sneaking up on the piano to the keys, and my mom had a baby grand piano in the house, and I wasn't allowed to touch it because I didn't know how to play it. And so I begged for piano lessons for my 4th birthday. And so that's when I started learning how to play the piano. I loved all kinds of music. I grew up with all kinds of German music influence in a house where we listened to Elvis and Debbie Boone, and I just had a rich heritage of jazz from my dad's side, and we just loved all kinds of music. So as I was growing up, I continued on piano, and when I got to be about 14 years old, I was in high school, I realized that these little size 6 hands, which are great for surgery and GYN, by the way, they're tiny, they were never going to reach the octave on the piano. And so I kind of reached a point where I could no longer be competitive. All the concertos and the people that were going on to the more competitive piano lifestyles and competitions, I just wasn't going to be able to do it. So I needed to find something else to do. And this is one of the first transformations that I had. I picked up the oboe, which is a double reed woodwind instrument, when I was in 6th grade, and I started playing that with my band. And that was super fun. I really loved it and did all kinds of contests in high school, and actually was a soloist at Allstate. And that was a really big deal. I loved playing the oboe. I also played the English horn. And that was something that I looked at as I was heading into college, and I thought, I love science. I really excelled in school. I had great grades. I was able to do a lot of college courses thanks to Sam Houston State University being in my town and collaborating with my high school. And I thought, gosh, I really have this calling to be a doctor. I'd had that calling since I was in junior high as well. And what I'd always thought was, well, if my opa immigrated and went to all the effort he did to build a life for me, the least I can do is use my talents to give back to others and do the best that I can do. So I was very motivated to work hard and to use my talents for the good of others. And so when I was getting ready to go into college, I thought, well, if I give up the science, I'll never get it back if I go in and I pursue music professionally. But I figured if I did science that I could keep the music, and that's what I did. I ended up getting a full President's Endowed Scholarship, the highest academic scholarship to Texas A&M University. Woo, love my Aggies. It was a wonderful school for me. I loved my time at A&M. I continued playing in the orchestra. There still is the Brazos Valley BVSO, Brazos Valley Symphony and Orchestra that I played in. I played in the A&M orchestra also throughout college. And I had a wonderful time as an undergrad. But that was not without challenges either. So my first year as an undergrad, I came in and I was enrolled in biomedical science because I thought, hey, I'm smart. I come from a line of engineers. And I got like 2 weeks into the engineering program, y'all, and I was like, this is definitely not the way to get into medical school. And I ended up leaving the engineering department and went into biomedical science, which was underneath our veterinary college. And that was a really cool degree because we got exposed to all kinds of things in the medical field that I wouldn't have gotten exposed to until medical school. So we did physiology and pharmacology and toxicology and all those really fun classes that were a little bit different than the basic sciences, and loved my time there. But before I got into that major, I've got a funny story for you. I almost lost my scholarship. So that first semester at Texas A&M, I went in and I was one of those students who had always had everything come pretty easy for them. And I didn't know how to study. And even though I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be an engineer and I switched majors, I still had to finish out some of the classes. And the part where my brain quit working was calculus. So I'd done like 3 semesters of calculus coming into college, but that was just by hard work and knocks. It's not because my brain naturally understood it. And I got into this physics class, which was this engineering physics class with calculus. And y'all, I bombed it. Like, I think I got a D and it was terrible. And so my GPA for the first semester at Texas A&M with this great scholarship that was personally donated by a family, like, yeah, like they knew who I was. It's not just the school gives it to you. It's like the family gives it to you for each donor. He was a banker in town in College Station. I'll never forget the beginning of my second semester. He called me into his office, the president of this bank, and he sat me down and he was like, you know that you got to do better than this, right? It was terrible. And I was like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then from there on out, I was good. I brought my GPA up and got into my third year of college, and I'd always had this habit of doing test runs. So I did a test run for my SATs, did a test run for interviews. I was working at the time in the pharmacology department for the Texas A&M College of Medicine. I thought, I'll just do a test run on my MCAT, which is the college entrance exams for medical school. I did pretty good. It was okay, and I had decent grades. And I thought, I'll just do a run-through application for med school. And y'all, I accidentally got in. So I ended up getting into med school when I was 20. Yeah, I started med school when I was 20. I was in med school before legal drinking age, which I think is kind of crazy and hilarious, but I think they'd gotten to know me. And that was a really important lesson in my life, that sometimes those relationships that you build, like we're building relationships here, and like we encourage on the show, those relationships mean as much or more than the grades and the stats, because you have to be good enough with your grades and your stats to meet the cutoff. But beyond that, the thing that propels you ahead in life and these kinds of things are the relationships and who you are, who people see you, and who they see in you as their potential. So I remember one old surgeon was interviewing me. Old, gosh, I'm probably his age now, which cracks me up. But we were doing an interview for Texas A&M Med School, and he looked at my hands. And he held my hand and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a surgeon. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a plastic surgeon ever since I was, in junior high, and I decided I wanted to be in medicine. I figured I'll take the fine motor skills from the music background that I have and my science, and I'll put them together and I'll be a kick-ass surgeon. Excuse me. I'll be a great surgeon. And he looked at me and he held my hands and he turned them over and he goes, yeah, I think these are the hands of a surgeon. And I ended up getting into medical school. So had a great time in medical school. I met my first husband and the father of my 4 beautiful, beautiful children there, and graduated at the age of 24 from medical school. The interesting about medical school was the first 2 years, which are basic sciences, I did okay in, really pretty well. But then the place where I really excelled were the clinical years. So that's the 3rd and 4th years. And we did our training at Scott & White in Temple, Texas, which is an amazing facility. I was so blessed to have such an incredible medical school background. So my first rotation at Scott & White was surgery. It was general surgery. And man, I was so excited. I loved it. I was like total gunner, working late. The residents loved me. I would say yes to everything. I worked hard and had a great rotation. And then I got to the end of it and I was told, you can't be a surgeon because you're a female and only men go into the surgery programs. And got blackballed from moving any further. And that's a kind of a longer story, but basically the department would not support me in that vein. And so here I was, another time in my life where I thought I was moving forward in one direction, and it was a real hard stop. And I had to figure out how to transform myself, how to pivot, and what was going to become of this. So I did a medicine rotation next, but then my third rotation was OBGYN. Y'all, I probably had the same thought that lots of y'all have about this profession, which was, why the heck would anybody choose to do that for the rest of their life? Seriously. And that's kind of how I thought about it. And then I got into it, and that was at the dawn of the age of laparoscopy. And the GYNs were doing super cool surgeries. We were doing that before general surgery had started doing it. And I loved the variety of surgeries that we were doing. I loved that there was GYN oncology and the infertility. I loved the taking care of the women. It was a place where I was wanted, both by the faculty and the women, and it was a natural fit. And I liked doing the deliveries too. It was fun, but my main love of OBGYN was always the GYN surgical part. So as luck would have it, I had a person in my faculty who had come from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And again, that lesson of emphasizing your relationships and who you know and who sees potential in you played fully through in my life. My husband at the time was in the military. I was a military wife. He was a ER. He became an ER physician, but at the time he was, when we were in med school, he was in the military, in the Army. And so we had to do a match. So match is the process that medical students go through to get to residency. And my husband went through a military match, which was a couple of months before I went through my civilian match. So usually when couples are together in med school, they match together and the match program takes that into account, but we weren't able to do that. So we very strategically planned to interview for the military spot that had the most civilian spots around it, and that happened to be Washington, D.C. at Wilford Hall. My husband was super smart. He was AOA and top of the class, and he easily got into that as his choice. And then I interviewed 7 residency programs in the Baltimore and DC area and was lucky enough to be chosen to go to Georgetown University for my residency. So loaded up our little VW Bug and our car, and we moved to Washington, D.C. I had a fantastic training in OBGYN at Georgetown. I have nothing but great things to say about that residency program. Just so fortunate. I still have relationships with the people that I was in residency with there, and got a very, very broad-based training. I got excellent surgical training in urogynecology before it was even called that, had incredible laparoscopic training, rotated through GYN oncology, which is the cancer wing branch of the field. There was a fellowship program there, had MFM, which is maternal fetal medicine program there, and also a fertility training. Not only did we have the diversity of training there, we also had a diversity of people that we took care of. Washington, D.C. is a fascinating, amazingly diverse, culturally diverse place. And we took care of all kinds of people from all kinds of socioeconomic languages. And we worked out of 4 different hospitals. One of them was a university hospital, which was super nice because that's where all of the, professors and politicians and, straight-laced people went. I don't know how to say this politely. It was a really fun place to be, very academic and very highbrow. Then we rotated through Arlington Community Hospital, which is an incredible program where I had an amazing breadth of community skill with great physicians that rotated with us, but that was just very community-based and just a ton of volume. And then we rotated through Sibley, which is in the Chevy Chase area, where very exclusive private hospital, but then the real gem of our program doesn't exist anymore. It was called DC General, which was the city hospital that was located right next to the city jail. And during those years, the residents, we ran the city hospital, and we rotated along with the residents from Howard University's residency program. So that was like turning us loose to the to manage and learn how to become physicians and be leaders. Well, the chief residents ran those programs. There's an amazing diversity of experience with people from, man, I got some stories. I'm not going to tell you here, but we had some stories. Graduating from residency, I had skill as a surgeon, and I was recognized for that during my program. And I really wanted to be a GYN oncologist because those were the ones that were doing the highest level of surgery. Well, my husband at the time, he had not done his residency yet. He had done a rotation overseas and then had come back and done GMO work, which is primary care work, so that he could choose where he wanted to go. And he chose to come back to San Antonio, Texas. That's how we ended up here. And because it was the best ER residency program in the military at BAMC and Wilford Hall. So I gave up my dream of becoming a GYN oncologist for my marriage and came to San Antonio with him and started practicing general OBGYN while he was starting his residency. And I did that for 2 years and got board certified. And then I was picked up for a job to work for a family practice residency program here in San Antonio. I had not really seen myself as doing that in particular, but I always loved teaching, in case you couldn't tell. And I had applied for the academic programs coming into San Antonio, but just wasn't a really good fit. So I'd ended up in private practice. So towards the end of my board certification, there was a new family practice program being formed at Christus Santa Rosa, and they recruited me to be the director of OBGYN and to start their program and to write their curriculum and direct all of to take on the responsibility for the obstetrics and GYN training for their program, which was an amazing, incredible experience. I loved my work there, and I worked in that capacity for 7 years. And during that time, the program grew, and we actually had the residents from the university family practice program come over, and I was an assistant professor and did lectures every week. In fact, sometimes people ask for my CV and they want to know how many talks I've given. And I'm like, well, let's see, once a week for 7 years, that's a lot, plus all of the other lectures and guest speaking engagements that I've done. So I got to a point with my CV that I'm just like, I've done a lot of lectures. And if you want me to talk, just ask me if I know the topic and I'll come talk for you. But I no longer list them all anymore. I ended up leaving that program. It was wonderful. It was a great time in my life where I was able to have my 4 beautiful children. And the reason for that is I had kind of a unique setup there. I didn't have to do call. I was overseeing the OBGYNs and the residents, and they were doing all of the deliveries. And I was able to find a position in medicine with some flexibility, which is a key point that I want to tell you guys about, which is you don't always have to do what you think you're going to do when you leave college or leave your residency or leave your training. There are often lots of different ways to get to where you're going. And in medicine, there are a lot of options for how you work and what you do as work. From clinical work or surgery to academics to this little job that I had. So during that 7 years while I worked for them, I had my 4 beautiful children, and they are just amazing kids. I love them, and I was really grateful for that program, but I kind of hit a glass ceiling. There was no place for me to go further further in family practice because I was an OBGYN. I couldn't move up in administration. And I had done some work with the FDA during that time. I was actually on a FDA advisory committee and had really enjoyed doing that work. Thought maybe I'd do a little bit of public health. And my husband at the time really wanted me to stay home and be a stay-at-home mother, which we had lots of discussions about and seemed kind of shocking to me. But yeah, I took a year off from medicine and I tried really hard to be a stay-at-home mom. I tried really hard. I had help. It just wasn't for me. God bless you women who are doing stay-at-home momming and loving it. I couldn't keep my brain and my mind off of medicine and doing things. And so I did stay home. I did concentrate more on my family and my kids and discovered that that's really not who I was meant to be. And I'm a much happier mother when I'm out busy serving in the capacities that I feel like I have and being a mom. I ended up at the end of that year. Well, during that year, I worked for on some projects with the Texas A&M Public Health college and with their master's degree in MPH, and helped them in a project. I worked with the health department in San Antonio on some projects, met some really wonderful people, and got really interested in access to healthcare for people. And so then at the end of that year, I ended up buying a medical practice east of San Antonio at a little town called Lavernia, and went into my first entrepreneurial adventure as a physician. I had done some entrepreneurial stuff before. I'm sure you heard about it if you listened to my New Year's talk and my interview with Darren. It was awesome. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to it. But this wasn't my first business to start, but it was my first practice. And I was still working part-time. I had taken a year off, so I ended up doing this clinic where I had employed nurse practitioners, and I had a surgeon that I worked with, so I was doing a little bit more surgery, but I was not doing deliveries. That practice crashed in 2008, just about the time that the housing market and the banks crashed. So did I. And I crashed really hard to the tune of $1,000. And no, I didn't go bankrupt. We didn't go bankrupt. But I met an amazing banker at that time who allowed me to roll the debt from that practice into a loan with her. And that was the beginning of my relationship with my banker, who has carried me through the rest of my businesses with Amity Bank. That was where I met Jeannie Bennett. I picked up myself, licked off my wounds, decided that I needed to go back into full-time OBGYN in order to pay down this debt, because the part-time thing at Lavernia was not cutting it. And so I sold that practice to a primary care physician, and I came back into full OBGYN practice in San Antonio, ironically to one of the groups that I had interviewed when I first came to town. So I joined this very large group, got very, very busy, paid down the debt, and became very successful. And it was in 2008, while I was in that practice, that robotics came out into the public market for GYN. Now, robotics had been started by Intuitive Surgical several decades prior. It had been started actually by the military as a means of surgeons being able to operate remotely with teams that were in the field. So it was set up in that manner, but then it had been developed through Intuitive Surgical to the Da Vinci platform that we know today. And they brought it into the public market about a decade before I was introduced to it, but it was not brought into GYN market until 2008. So in 2009, I got my hands on the training for it for the first time. And it was like, that's what God had made me for. Like, it took me 40 some odd years for me to actually get to the point that the thing I was supposed to do in life that I couldn't have even known back when I was doing music and surgery and going through all the difficulties. And I was in the second group of only 12 OBGYNs in the country that was trained at the highest level, the master's level in Celebration, Florida. So I was in the first 24 GYN surgeons in the country trained at that level. I trained with my very good friends to this day, Arnie Avicula and Dr. Thomas Payne. I should say Dr. Avicula. It was such an incredibly inspiring, life-affirming place for me to be. And as I started into robotics, they say life is lived forward, but understood backwards. I could see all of the steps through life guiding me to that point. And I wholeheartedly stepped into just becoming the best robotic surgeon I could. What I noticed was that I could do really fine surgeries with small incisions, and it made surgery easier for my patients. And so within the large group that I was in, if I hadn't joined that group, I wouldn't have had the high enough volume to be able to be even exposed to robotics, much less to be able to be trained. You had to have a certain volume of surgery and practice to even get to train at that level. And so that was the gratitude lesson from that practice. As I got further into the robotics and decided that that's what I wanted to concentrate in, this field of minimally invasive GYN surgery, or MIGS, which is what I now call myself. It's basically benign complex gynecology. This field became developed. and I'm one of the pioneers of that field, I negotiated with my group. I noticed that my male peers who were in other groups that were doing this, they had a higher volume of surgery. They could do a whole lot more. And the reason they could is because they didn't have the obstetrics load. And I liked obstetrics, but I was noticing that the night call was wearing on my body. The older I get, the more I realize that that's a serious health consequence, the sleep disruption that comes along with that type of lifestyle. And I couldn't get the surgery volume into my practice. To be able to bump up the surgery volume, I needed to drop the obstetrics. And so after a couple of years of negotiations with my group that didn't go well, or you could say they went really well, I ended up resigning from that practice and founded South and Central Texas's first minimally invasive GYN surgical practice, Virtuosa GYN. Virtuosa means the best feminine version of yourself. So a virtuoso in music is a great musician. And I had this goal surgically. I see surgery as very similar to music in skill and technique and fluency. In fact, if you look at the data that Intuitive Surgical gets on our hands off of our consoles, our surgeons, they can tell dialects of surgeons. They can tell where we're from by the movement of our hands on the consoles, which I think is completely fascinating. So there are dialects of surgery. But back to my story, I digress. So started this practice, and the practice had a really, really rough start. I had this business plan for it to start in one place. I thought maybe some of my patients will follow me. I had non-compete. The hospital where I wanted to be didn't have women's surgery. It didn't have women's surgery at all. It had no robotics. And so I ended up out kind of in BFE, and that fell through really, really fast and hard. And so again, I almost went bankrupt in 2 years or a year and a half into starting the practice. And there are two things I remember about that time. One was I sat down with my business advisor and I said, what the heck am I going to do? I have like 2 months reserved for payroll and then I'm done. And he looked at me, he and my accountant, I'll never forget it. They said, you have to add obstetrics. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I have gone to all this trouble to have a GYN only practice. And you're telling me I have to go back to doing babies and obstetrics? And they're like, no. There's this thing called this laborist program now. You don't have to do the deliveries. But if you saw the patients in clinic and did their early care and their sonograms, you would get visit money very quickly in. You wouldn't have to wait 90 days for a global fee or 9 months for a global fee. You could start with some revenue. And they helped me start a very quick revenue stream. And that actually saved the practice. And then over the years, we've gotten stronger with the GYN. We've now dropped the obstetrics because that's not the focus of our practice. And we have amazing surgeons that amazing obstetric practices that we send our patients to for OB. I do a ton of fertility work, however, and that is really gratifying. So that was one of the major lessons in this startup. The other one was I was sitting in my tiny little office in Schertz, Texas. And when I tell y'all little, I started with me and 2 staff members, my manager and a front desk / biller. And we had 3 little rooms. It was like 900 square feet. And we're sitting there one day and in walks this new CEO from Northeast Methodist Hospital. This was the hospital that hadn't had women's services in 20 years and had no robotics. And they had no interest in me working there. But I had a little office close by because it was my San Antonio office. So anyway, he comes walking in with his physician recruiter and he goes, hey, how would you like to start a new service line for my hospital? I'm the new CEO. And I was like, holy cow. Like, there is no way I could have put that into my business plan 2 years ago. Like, it did not exist. And then here it comes walking in through my door. And I was like, yes, sir. And so I started working at Northeast Methodist Hospital that year, and we started their robotics program and their women's health services program. And so that's given me a whole lot of gratitude, and we've built this program into what it is now, which is a surgery program. I just finished my 2-year tenure as chief of staff for surgery. We've built that into a strong, viable surgery program with trauma added to it this year. We've got cardiovascular surgery, and we're going from 2 now up to 4 very, very busy robots. And over these years that I've been sitting there at Northeast Methodist from 2014 until about 2018 or 19, just before COVID, I was just sitting there doing more and more surgeries and learning how to do a practice where we became more efficient with getting the patients in just for surgery for me, and then doing their surgeries and then getting them healed up and healthy so that I could get in more patients and help more people. So I do have 2 nurse practitioners that do all of the general GYN in our practice. You might see them first if you're coming in as a patient because they help me with the workups, as well as they do most of our annual GYNs and endometrial biopsies and birth control and STI testing and all that. But anyway, I was sitting there in this little bubble of Northeast Methodist Hospital, which is a very small community hospital. And what it allowed me to do was sit there and get my Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours of surgery. I'm not literally 10,000 hours. I don't know. I'd have to look at it. But it allowed me to sit there and practice and hone my skill much as a musician would until they got to the point where they thought, oh, maybe this is good enough to show somebody. Well, I already was getting hints that it was good enough to show somebody because we would have product reps come through our OR, and my first assists would rotate through the ORs, and they were like, oh, you're doing this differently than other people, and we wish that you would train other people how to do it like you do it. You're doing something good and different, and you have something to share. And I thought, oh, that's really good. Maybe I have this idea of teaching people. As we've progressed over the years, I've honed my skills. I've taken care of thousands of patients. I do about 700 plus surgeries a year. 350 of them a year are robotic surgery. We have introduced ERAS protocols, which are protocols that make surgery easier and less painful for patients. And I am a big proponent of outpatient GYN surgery. When COVID came along and the hospitals had bed shortages, it really put a strain on our ability to do surgery for women for non-emergent causes, as long as they were needing beds. And so as a result, most of the hysterectomies and endometriosis and fibroid surgeries in town, they got postponed. Most docs weren't doing them. And so what I noticed is I got a big bump in my surgical volume. They found me and they started coming to me. And then the hospital was like, hey, if you're able to do these as outpatient surgeries and you can keep going through these bed shortages because you're not using our hospital beds, then we want you to teach other surgeons how to do that too. The year before COVID hit, I had already started negotiations with my hospital system because I wanted an outpatient robotic facility. They were a little slow to do that, but the COVID thing pushed them over the edge. And so 2 years ago, we got the go-ahead for starting to build our surgery center. And I'm so excited about this because it represents an epicenter for women's surgery. Our goal is to be the best surgery center and the place to go for surgery for women in San Antonio. It already has been recognized as an epicenter for intuitive surgical. I am recognized as not only as a proctor for intuitive surgical and a lecturer for intuitive surgical, but I'm working on virtual proctoring and then creating this new mentorship program. So the educational piece is what's coming next, and that's what I want to just share with you all. I've spent all of this time sitting there doing high volume surgery and honing my skills along with my assistant, Lacey. And she and I have been recognized as the 4th team in the country by Intuitive Surgical to start training for surgical assists to do this at another level. So that's another part of our training. We're also going to be including resident education. We already have residents rotating with us. They will be, we'll be increasing that program with dual consults and AV teaching. We have a teaching facility being built where I can be on staff full time instead of being in the office sometime and in the surgery sometime. My office is going to be right above the surgical suite. So I will be an on-site mentor for younger surgeons, not just residents, but also people in the community, surgeons who have gotten trained but wish to increase their skills, increase their complexity of surgeries that they're able to complete. They'll now be able to come to our facility and have an on-site mentor to be able to help them learn those skills. In this way, I'm hoping to fulfill our goal of making minimally invasive surgery or surgery easier for more women, because I can do a whole bunch, but I'm only one person. I can do a whole lot more if I educate. And that includes not just educating you as the patients and knowing what's available, but also educating other physicians so that they know it's available and they can bump up their skills too. So to give you an idea what that looks like, in my practice, about 98 to 99% of our surgeries are completed minimally invasively. That means that they don't have a large incision. The other thing is 95% of our surgeries are completed as outpatient surgeries. So most of our surgeries that stay inpatient are either people who have complex medical problems and need to stay for anticoagulants or cardiovascular therapies or other medical reasons. So contrast that with what I was doing when I was a general OBGYN. About a third of my patients were open cases, and only about probably 40% were outpatient. And so it's my hope to take what we've learned and what we've done and be able to teach others so that we can bring better surgeries to you. And then along around 2021, I think it was after COVID, I got a call from a company that's working to do a study of surgeons' hands with their outcomes. And so I can't name the name of this study, but they looked at 30,000 robotic surgeons, and they were looking at the data from their console. When we operate, we use video game joysticks at a console. They capture all of that data. They were looking at the most efficient surgeons, and they picked the top 40 GYNs in the world, benign GYNs. Sorry, my GYN friends. And they picked the top 40 top 40 general surgeons. And they're now doing studies on us. So I'm enrolled as part of this study where they're taking the hand movements of the most efficient surgeons and they're matching it to outcomes data to show and to inform AI and surgical training in the future for best practices. So that's something that I'm very proud of. It's something that I'm taking into the next year as we launch our training program. And we hope to be able to share more of that with you later. So that's what we're looking forward to in the next year. I hope that you'll continue to follow, like, subscribe, and share. And I thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions below about who I am or what I do, please drop a comment. We'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you. I'll see you next time on the Dr. Crockett Show.